What's new? Any mold dog results yet?
No, other than where it reacted, I'm still waiting for the mold expert. He was supposed to come last week and he became ill. So hopefully this week, because I'm traveling to see my son in on Thursday. So
Hmm.
hopefully he'll come before that. But in the meantime, I have taken some actions. Um, as far as doing some cleaning in small spaces.
Good.
Um, and they're actually having a building meeting tomorrow night. So I wanted to have some kind of report for them. But I did find out that I thought my hall closet, no, not hall closet, my main closet with all my coats, the wall in there is suspect. And I thought the wall was also the same area in the hallway, but it isn't. It's actually goes into my neighbor's because
Ah,
we measured, and the dog only sat down in one place in this long hallway, and I thought it was the opposite side of my closet, but it wasn't. So I thought that was interesting.
so
I'm
that says it's the neighbor's wall or the neighbor's
Yeah,
space?
it's the neighbor's space, but her place 5 years ago was gutted. So it's hard to believe that there's anything going on in her place unless there's something in the adjoining wall.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you say that because it seems reasonable that if the place was quote unquote gutted 5 years ago, that it wouldn't have mold. And that's the same logic that people use when they move into a new build. They say, oh, it's a new build, so it's mold free. But that's not the case, unfortunately, for various reasons. One, weather and humidity and faults in construction and construction materials that happen honestly, but then there's, corner cutting and things to throw up neighborhoods as fast as you can and make as much money, which also lead to mold. And so I'm saying all this to say I had a patient that has SIRS and they moved into a new home to try and uh, get away from a moldy environment because they knew the place that they did live in was moldy. So they moved into a new build thinking, hey, it's a new build. It'll be mold free. And they had a mold expert come out and they actually ended up having mold in the laundry room and in the basement, I believe. And they cleaned all that out and she was still having symptoms. And so they had this super specialist environmental guy come out and he found that um, after they cleaned the mold and he checked, there wasn't mold in the home anymore. But what happened was that in this house, they had blown in the uh, the blown in foam insulation that they use in the attic was releasing so many VOCs, which stands for volatile organic compounds. It was releasing so many VOCs that those were causing her SIRS symptoms. And so she was obviously very sensitive and had SIRS and everything. So she would react, but her husband, never had symptoms. And he said, well, even when I go up in the attic, I get congested. And so it turns out that they had blown in the foam insulation that was off gassing all these VOCs, and the house was a closed system. It wasn't an open air system. So what they did was they ordered some kind of air system they could install to make change the home from a closed to an open air system to vent those VOCs. And so we're waiting to hear how she does with that
Wow.
new system in there. So I just want people to know, like mold gets You can have mold in new builds. Just because you remediate it doesn't mean it's gone. There's lots of trucks driving around that says they do mold remediation, but unless it looks like a hazmat situation where it's like the end of ET when they're in those white suits and they
Yeah.
have the plastic tunnels everywhere. Unless it looks like that, they're probably not doing it correctly. Um, but say they do. Mold is just one form of biotoxin, one form of inflammagen. There's over 30 of them. So you could have a negative mold test, but still have inflammagens in your home that are driving CIRS symptoms. And that's why it's called CIRS, which is CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, instead of, mycotoxin or mold toxicity, because there's many more things beside mold that can drive it. And so there's an example I just shared that volatile organic compounds from foam insulation.
Yeah.
People who are sensitive to maybe off gassing from new carpets or new hardwood floors or new car smell. Like there's lots of things. So um, wish we could say it was gutted 5 years ago. There's no way it's that, but you really can't.
Well, right. So, yeah, I'm just
So that's the problem with a co-living
curious.
space, is
Right.
it's like, well, the mold isn't going to respect you. They're not going to be like, well, Maria doesn't live in this home, so let's not bother her. You know, it's
Yeah.
the mold is in the building, and if someone's sensitive, a wall isn't enough to protect you, obviously. Um, so
Right.
that's where it would be interesting at your meeting to bring that up in some way. And landlords hate that, of course, because they don't want to pay the money to
Well, and the
take care of the entire
stairwell,
building.
I mean, the dog didn't like the stairwell at all. Like it sat in every floor. I mean, you can look at the stairwell and see there's water damage.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm going to keep pursuing and we'll see.
Good.
Thank you though.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
On the same wavelength as that, I'm looking into replacing my ductwork for possible mold in that.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, so HVAC is a very common location for mold. Um, and so again, let's piggyback on that. So all right, so we talked about Maria's uh, townhomes and the remediation and things we just talked about. And now the question is ductwork. So yes, a common location for mold illness is or for mold to reside is in the HVAC, so in the ducts. And oftentimes, if you have someone come and test your home, they set up their little tripod to test the air, right? And if if some mold doesn't float by in the air at that level of the tripod, then they say, nope, you don't have mold. But that tripod isn't testing the air up here or the air down here or anything in the HVAC. And so, again, there's lots of nuance to quote unquote mold illness. And as I said a moment ago, it's mold is the spokesperson, but it's really biotoxin illness. Okay, so we should be calling it biotoxin illness. And biotoxins, there's over 30 of them. Mold is one. Um, there's many more. There's actinomycetes, there's ciguatera, there's volatile organic compounds, there's mold you can have the black mold on your wall, right? People are familiar with it with the black mold. And if they don't see that in their shower or on their walls, they say, hey, I don't have mold. But mold will travel and not necessarily stick to the walls. It may be in the spores, and the spores live in the dust. And so if you run a test on your home to look for mold, like the ERMI test from the EPA is a good one, or the Hertz Me 2 test from envirobiomics.com. These tests these test kits send you something that you connect to your vacuum, and you vacuum the busiest rooms in your home, And the purpose of that is to vacuum up the dust and see are there any mold spores in the dust, and if so, what kind. Or another way they'll test is they'll send you a Swiffer, and you Swiffer your busiest surfaces, and you see, are you picking up any mold spores? Or are you picking up any actinomycetes, which are actually bacteria? And they're believe it or not, actinomycetes bacteria are what cause the musty, quote unquote, mold smell that people talk about when they go down the basement. That musty mold smell, quote unquote, actually isn't mold, it's actinomycetes bacteria. And so again, your your local mold guy isn't testing for actinomycetes when he's testing your air for mold. There could be beta glucans is another one that is common and very inflammatory. And so we need to test various surfaces, various rooms, various locations for various things. And again, I think that the company, and I don't get anything from this company, they don't know who I am, but I've used them and they're great. And Dr. Shoemaker supports them, and it's envirobiomics.com. And they have multiple tests that go in depth with all of this. And so you can look at their kits and pick and choose. Do you want to test for mold or mold and actinomycetes or mold actinomycetes and beta glucans? Do you want to run the ERMI or the HERTSMI? And those are acronyms for things. So if you have had the cheap local guy's air test and it says it's not moldy, but you're continuing to have symptoms and you believe that there is, you need to do a more in-depth test. And then as we've learned from Maria, there are things like specially trained mold dogs, which she shared she's used, and those dogs will go and sniff out the mold and point or sit down or indicate it in some way, whereas maybe the air test didn't find it. So yes, HVAC can include these biotoxins, and if it does, it does need to be remediated, um, especially if someone is living in that place that is exhibiting certain symptoms. And ultimately, if you're in a townhome or apartment complex or some place where there's multiple units and there's maybe not mold in your unit, but there's mold in the hallways or in other units, you're still going to be impacted by that, potentially by contamination in the shared spaces, but also through the airways and HVAC ducts. And if the owners don't want to spend the money to improve the place, then sometimes you have to move out. And that's not always convenient, but if you are someone who is mold sensitive and you have the mold genetics that make you susceptible, you get sicker quicker with every exposure and the longer you stay. And so the very first principle is you have to remove yourself from the exposure, and that is moving out. And I've had consultation calls with patients who believed they were sick with mold and they knew it was in their home. And I said, well, you know, before you come see me, move out of your house. Because if you stay in the exposure, we're just going one step forward, one step back, working against ourselves. So I've had people where they literally took 6 months to sell their house. They did, and then they came in and they were no longer in a moldy environment, and now we can help them.
We were on vacation and my son, who normally takes Claritin every day, did not need it when we were away. And when we came back, he got stuffy again. And that's one of the reasons that I'm looking into the mold situation.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful, and props to you, because if a supplement works or doesn't work, that's a clue, right? If a drug works or doesn't work, that's a clue. In this case, if a vacation works or doesn't work, that's a clue. And so when I'm suspecting SIRS or biotoxin illness in someone, that's a common question is, well, hey, Maria, what if you went on a 2 week vacation to Utah, right, where there's dry heat and a different environment? Would your symptoms improve? And if they did for that 2 weeks, and then you come back home and they return, that tells us again, hey, it's the environment more than anything, the living environment. So that would be a suggestion that you might have to leave that location. And it can be your home, it could be your workplace, it could be your school, it could be the consideration for what to test is where are you spending most of your time? Most of us, it's in our home and our workplace or our school if we're in school. So testing those areas is important.